He wore the tux for the world, but what he carried home was heavier than any role. Pierce Brosnan became a fixture of cool on-screen, an icon in a black tie. Yet the life behind the flashbulbs was stitched together from loss, stubborn survival, and a quiet, stubborn dignity. How do you stay unbroken when everything you love keeps being taken away? That question sits at the center of his story, and what follows is a look past the headlines. The childhood fractures that made him watch, the choices that turned hunger into craft, the private tragedies that would reshape him again and again. But that's not the whole story. What he built after those blows, the art, the advocacy, the small rituals of ordinary mornings, is the part that surprises people most. Stay with me. The early fracture and the hunger it created. Long before the tuxedos and premieres, there was a boy standing in the doorway of a small Irish home, watching his father walk away for the last time. No dramatic goodbye, no loud argument, just absence. That silence became the background music of Pierce Brosnan's childhood. His mother, May, worked endless shifts as a nurse, and when the bills outweighed the wages, she left for London to find steadier work, promising she'd return soon. Soon stretched into 7 long years. In that gap, Pierce was passed between relatives, never staying long enough to belong, learning early that stability was something other people had. He became the quiet child, the one who watched more than he spoke, who learned that listening could be a kind of armor. Teachers saw flashes of imagination behind the stillness, but what they couldn't see was the vow already forming inside him. If the world wouldn't give him permanence, he'd build it himself. When his mother finally returned, bringing with her a gentle stepfather named William Carmichael, Pierce was 11, old enough to have learned independence, young enough to still crave home. William taught him simple things: how to fish, how to mend what's broken, how to trust again. And then one afternoon, William took him to the cinema to see Goldfinger. The screen lit up with Sean Connery's effortless confidence, and for the first time, Pierce saw the shape of who he wanted to become: composed, fearless, untouchable. That night, the dream wasn't about fame. It was about control. A boy who'd grown up with nothing decided he would never feel powerless again. But the road from small-town Ireland to Hollywood would begin with a single, accidental spark, one that arrived when he least expected it. The accidental spark that changed everything. In London, he chased art, not acting. At 16, Pierce Brosnan enrolled at St. Martin's School of Art, surviving mostly on tea and toast while sketching late into the night. His plan was simple: paint, create, and somehow carve out a quieter life than the one he'd known. Acting wasn't even a whisper of a thought, until one random afternoon in 1971. He wandered past a small theater workshop, heard laughter echoing from inside, and stopped to watch a street performer rehearsing. A fire eater, of all things. Something about that defiance, the control, the calm inside danger, drew him in. When the performer paused, Pierce asked, half joking, if he could try. The moment he held that torch, the room shifted. People stopped what they were doing. The director watching didn't just see a curious art student. He saw presence, focus, weight. That impulsive act flipped the course of his life. The troupe took him in, and soon he auditioned for the Drama Centre London, one of the toughest acting schools in the country. Most students broke under the pressure. He didn't. He'd already lived through harder things. While others had safety nets, Pierce had only resolve. He worked nights, studied Shakespeare, learned mime and circus skills. He absorbed everything, as if each lesson was a rung on a ladder out of obscurity. The theater gave him something painting never could: a pulse, a place to put all that bottled-up emotion from years of silence. By the mid-1970s, he'd started earning small roles in stage thrillers. The pay was tiny, but the work was electric. On stage, the quiet boy from Ireland vanished, replaced by someone who could command a room without saying a word. He didn't know it yet, but this was the same intensity that would one day make a room full of producers stop mid-sentence and say, "That's him. That's Bond." But before that, he had to face the kind of luck that tests ambition, fame that comes too early, and opportunity that vanishes just when you reach for it. The breakthrough that almost cost him everything. By the early 1980s, the quiet Irish kid had turned into London's next big export. After a handful of theater hits and blink and you'll miss him film moments, fate handed him a curveball, a screen test for a new American detective series called Remington Steele. He went in expecting a small supporting role. He walked out the lead. When the show premiered in October 1982, it exploded. 15 million viewers every week, broadcast across 80 countries. Overnight, Pierce Brosnan went from stage actor to international heartthrob. The accent, the wit, the effortless charm, it all felt designed for television, and audiences loved him for it. But success, as he would learn, often carries a shadow. Within months, the whispers started. He's the next Bond. Magazine covers ran side-by-side shots of him and Sean Connery, headlines teasing the future. And just when it looked like destiny had arrived, reality snapped back. In 1986, Remington Steele was suddenly canceled, freeing him up just as the producers of James Bond began looking for a replacement. He was measured for suits, the press hinted he was as good as confirmed, and the world was ready to see a new 007. Then, NBC revived Remington Steele at the last minute. Contract in place, Pierce had no choice. The role went to Timothy Dalton. To the public, it was just bad timing. To him, it felt like a door slammed shut in his face. For nearly a decade afterward, he carried that unfinished chapter everywhere he went. The almost Bond, the man the world expected but never got. He kept working quietly in thrillers and dramas, but the longing never left. Each project was a rehearsal for the role that kept eluding him. Still, he waited, patient, focused, ready. Because deep down, he knew chances like that don't die. They circle back when you're ready to meet them. And in 1994, when the call finally came, it wasn't the same man picking it up. The boy who once watched from the sidelines was about to become the face of a legend, and the weight of that crown would test him like nothing before. Becoming Bond, and the price of wearing the crown. When the call finally came in 1994, it felt less like opportunity and more like destiny catching up. Pierce Brosnan had waited nearly 10 years for this moment, and when he stepped onto the set of GoldenEye, he carried not just excitement, but the ghosts of everything he'd already survived. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The Bond franchise was on life support, struggling to stay relevant after a 6-year gap and fading audience interest. If GoldenEye failed, the tuxedo might have been retired for good. But when the film hit theaters in 1995, Brosnan didn't just meet expectations, he obliterated them. The movie roared past $350 million worldwide, resurrecting 007 and sealing his place in cinematic history. The bungee jump opening scene, done largely by him, became an instant icon. He wasn't playing Bond anymore. He was Bond. For audiences, he was everything the character promised: confident, charming, untouchable. But behind the scenes, the performance came at a cost. The higher the pedestal, the lonelier the air. Fame demands a trade, privacy, time, and, most of all, the right to simply exist without being compared to a myth. He filmed 3 more blockbusters after GoldenEye, each bigger, louder, more explosive than the last. Together they earned over $1 billion, and for a while it looked like Pierce Brosnan had achieved the kind of immortality few actors ever do. Yet beneath the applause, a quiet truth lingered. Once you become an icon, the world stops seeing you. He felt it during interviews when journalists talked more about martinis than meaning. He felt it on sets when directors referenced Bond instead of Pierce. And though he wore the tuxedo like armor, a small part of him knew that one day the same suit that had elevated him might be the thing that locks him inside a single image. Still, he gave it everything. He carried the franchise on his shoulders, kept the mystique alive, and reminded the world why 007 mattered. But just as he finally seemed invincible, life, once again, reminded him how fragile even legends can be. Because while the world saw a hero on screen, at home, he was quietly holding together a family being torn apart by something far crueler than any villain Bond ever faced: the loves and losses that rewrote his soul. Behind the red carpets and cameras, Pierce Brosnan's real life was nothing like the movies. Fame could make him bulletproof on screen, but off it, he was a husband and father watching the people he loved most slip through his hands. twice. He met Cassandra Harris in the late 1970s, an actress already established, radiant and sharp-witted. When she entered a room, people noticed. When she spoke, he listened. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, and Pierce stepped into that family without hesitation. He didn't play at being a father, he became one. Cassandra grounded him in a way no role ever could. In her, he found the home he'd missed as a child. They married in 1980, built a life together, and 3 years later welcomed their son, Sean. For a while, it was everything he'd ever wanted. Stability, laughter, the kind of peace that felt like it might finally last. But then came the small signs that something wasn't right. Fatigue, pain, endless medical tests. In 1987, Cassandra was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, the same disease that would later haunt their daughter. For 4 years, he lived in hospitals and waiting rooms, walking hand in hand with her through treatments that offered hope and heartbreak in equal measure. She fought with unflinching courage, facing the truth even when it hurt to say it out loud. On December 28, 1991, one day after their 11th wedding anniversary, she passed away at just 43. Pierce later said it felt like the ground opened beneath my feet. There's no way to describe that kind of grief. It doesn't fade. It settles quietly into your bones. But he kept going because that's what she would have wanted. Then, more than 2 decades later, life circled back in the cruelest way imaginable. Their daughter, Charlotte, the same bright soul who'd once watched her mother fight, began to show the same symptoms. The diagnosis was identical, the same merciless disease, the same cruel timeline. She fought with strength, even marrying her partner, Alex, in a small ceremony just weeks before her death. 2 weeks later, on June 28, 2013, she was gone. A mother at 43, a daughter at 41, the same illness, the same month, the same unbearable symmetry. That kind of pain doesn't leave you. It changes you. Pierce carried it quietly, channeling it into his work with cancer awareness groups, fundraising, and advocacy. But the scars are there. Not the visible kind, the kind that make every breath a small act of courage. And just when it seemed life couldn't take more from him, it did, in a way that was quieter, but cut just as deep, because some losses don't come from death. They come from betrayal, the quiet betrayal that shook his faith. In 2004, while filming in the Bahamas, Pierce Brosnan's phone rang, a short call that ended an era. The voice on the other end said, "You were a great James Bond. Thank you. Goodbye." And just like that, the role that had defined him for a decade was gone. No warning, no conversation, no respect. After 4 blockbuster films that revived the franchise, the man who was Bond had been quietly replaced. Publicly, he smiled. Privately, it shattered him. He later admitted it felt like being kicked to the curb. It wasn't just losing a job, it was losing the identity he'd carried through grief, through rebuilding, through everything. Within weeks, studios labeled him too Bond. Film offers vanished, salaries dropped, and the man who once commanded a billion-dollar franchise suddenly felt invisible. His son remembers the first time he saw his father cry, when the trailer for Casino Royale played. It wasn't jealousy, it was mourning. Watching another man wear the life he'd built cut deeper than anyone knew. And as if fate wanted to remind him that pain comes in layers, another heartbreak unfolded quietly. His adopted son, Christopher, began drifting into addiction. Pierce tried everything: rehab, long talks, endless second chances. But some fights can't be won for someone else. Eventually, he had to step back, not to give up, but to love from afar. 2 losses, one professional, one personal, collided in silence. Yet through it all, he refused to grow bitter. He kept working, painting, and showing up even when the world seemed to have turned the page. Because Pierce Brosnan had already learned one truth the hard way: when life takes everything, you build again, piece by piece. The woman who helped him breathe again. In 1994, at a beach party in Cabo San Lucas, Pierce met journalist Keely Shea Smith, and for the first time in years, he felt peace. She didn't see the movie star or the man the world called Bond. She saw someone still learning how to live with grief. Keely didn't try to fix him. She simply stayed. Through sleepless nights, anniversaries that reopened old wounds, and the quiet moments when silence said more than words. They married in 2001 in an old Irish abbey, a ceremony that felt less like a wedding and more like a promise that love could exist even after loss. Together, they built a warm, grounded life with their sons, Dylan and Paris. When tabloids mocked Keely's appearance, Pierce stood firm. "She's the most beautiful woman in my eyes." That loyalty became his quiet statement to the world. Love isn't measured in headlines. Today, they live between Hawaii and Malibu, painting, walking the beaches, finding joy in calm mornings and family laughter. Keely gave him what fame never could: stillness, safety, and a place to set down the weight of the past. Because after everything he's lost, Pierce Brosnan finally learned what it means to truly be home. The art of moving forward. Today, at 71, Pierce Brosnan no longer chases roles. He chooses them. The man once defined by a tuxedo and a gun is now defined by a paintbrush, a garden, and a family that survived every storm with him. His Malibu and Hawaii homes are filled with sunlight, laughter, and canvases splashed with color. Pieces he paints as both therapy and tribute. What began as a way to cope with grief has become his second language. Through art, he tells the stories words can't. He still acts, but on his own terms, in roles that interest him, not those that define him. Away from the cameras, he channels his energy into causes that matter: cancer awareness, ocean preservation, children's rights, and environmental protection. Every charity appearance, every auctioned painting carries a thread of purpose, a quiet vow to turn pain into something that helps others. Physically, time has left its marks: silver hair, slower steps, but he wears them with pride. They're proof that he made it through. And emotionally, he's lighter now, not untouched, but unbroken. He once said, "Life has to go on." And if it does, you better find something worth living for. For Pierce Brosnan, that something isn't fame or legacy. It's love for his wife, his children, his art, and the planet he hopes to leave better than he found it. And maybe that's the quiet brilliance of his story. He spent decades playing a man who never lost control, but his real power came from learning how to heal. Which chapter of his journey speaks to you most? The fame, the heartbreak, or the rebuilding that came after? Share your thoughts below, and remember, sometimes the most heroic stories aren't the ones we watch on screen. They're the ones people survive in silence.